I've faced monsters born from nightmares, from ancient curses, and from dark desires. But in the remote wetlands of Australia, I was sent to face something else entirely. An echo. The message from my mysterious friend was clear: do not intervene unless necessary. My mission wasn't to hunt, but to observe. The target. The bunyip, a creature of Aboriginal legend, said to haunt the billabongs and cause mysterious disappearances. This journey took me to a harsh and unforgiving land, a world of scorching heat, venomous snakes, and an ancient, sprawling silence. Here, I had to learn a completely new set of skills, not how to fight, but how to listen. To listen to the stories of the tribal elders, to listen to the land, and to listen to the mournful cry of a creature that wasn't a bloodthirsty monster, but a guardian trying to protect its home from the true invaders. Cairo was a city of organized chaos, a place where the scent of spices and exhaust fumes battled for dominance. I was holed up in a nondescript apartment, trying to decipher the last message from my mysterious benefactor, a friend. The words "Egypt is waiting" were a tantalizing promise of answers, a potential endgame to my hunt for the agency. I was planning my next move, researching ancient sites and forgotten histories, when my burner phone buzzed with a new directive from the same source. Fun. This message was different. It felt more urgent, less like an invitation and more like an assignment. An ancient guardian is threatened in Australia. Observe, understand. Do not intervene unless necessary. Australia. The command was a jarring left turn from the path I thought I was on. Before I could question the logic, I started digging. The Australian news feeds were reporting on a series of disappearances in the Northern Territory. A small group of geological surveyors had vanished near a remote billabong, a stagnant, isolated pool of water left behind by a receding river. The official narrative was predictable: crocodile attack, or perhaps they'd simply succumbed to the brutal, unforgiving nature of the outback. But the real story, as always, was hiding in the margins. On the cryptid forums and paranormal message boards I monitored, the hushed whispers were all pointing to one name, a word steeped in Aboriginal folklore: the bunyip. The descriptions were wildly inconsistent, a hallmark of a genuine local legend. Some described it as a fearsome beast with tusks and a horse-like tail. Others painted a picture of a large, fur-covered creature, half dog, half seal. But all the stories agreed on two things: it lived in the water, and its deep, booming cry at night was a sound of profound sorrow and a terrifying omen. I looked at the two messages on my phone. Egypt is waiting. And now, this. It felt like a deliberate diversion, but the tone of the second message suggested something more. After my trial with the succubus in Rome, I was beginning to understand how a friend operated. This wasn't just a monster hunt. This was another test. Rome had tested my will. This, I suspected, was a test of my judgment. A test to see if I could be more than just a weapon, more than just a hunter. I packed my bag, the mysteries of Egypt momentarily set aside. The trail of breadcrumbs was leading me to the other side of the world, to a land of rust-colored earth and ancient spirits. My new mission wasn't to kill a monster, but to understand one, and perhaps to figure out why it needed protecting. Getting to the billabong was an ordeal in itself. A flight to Darwin, a rented four-wheel drive, and then hours of driving on roads that devolved from asphalt to gravel, and finally to a barely there dirt track. The world outside my window transformed into a vast, flat expanse of red earth and sun-bleached vegetation under a relentless, pale blue sky. When I finally arrived, the heat hit me like a physical blow. It was a dry, suffocating heat that seemed to radiate from the ground itself. And the flies, a persistent, buzzing black cloud that immediately swarmed me, seemingly determined to crawl into my eyes, nose, and mouth. But more than the heat or the insects, it was the silence that was most profound. It wasn't the absence of sound. The air hummed with the drone of insects and the distant caw of a crow. It was a deep, ancient quiet, the silence of a land that had existed long before humans, and would likely exist long after. I found the abandoned campsite easily. A couple of heavy-duty tents, a scorched fire pit, and expensive surveying equipment left in a hurry. The official story about a crocodile attack already seemed thin. No one leaves behind thousands of dollars of gear if they can help it. Quaver. My investigation began at the water's edge. The billabong was a placid, murky sheet of water, its surface reflecting the sky like a dark mirror. The muddy bank was a canvas of tracks. I saw the distinctive slide marks of a crocodile, but they were old. The fresh tracks were something else entirely. They were large, almost the size of my boot, but broad and webbed. They weren't reptilian. They were mammalian. Beside them were deep furrows in the mud, as if something large and heavy, with a smooth, powerful underbelly, had dragged itself out of the water. This was no crocodile. I spent the next few hours trying to follow the tracks, but my skills, honed in jungles and urban environments, felt clumsy and inadequate here. The heat was disorienting. The landscape, which looked uniform, was a deceptive maze of dry creek beds and dense thickets of paperbark trees. Every shadow could hide a threat. My wake-up call came when I nearly stepped on a snake coiled beside a rock. It was a pale, brown, almost innocuous-looking creature, but my fragmented knowledge base screamed a single, terrifying word: inland taipan, the most venomous snake on the planet. I froze, backing away slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. Nullen. I managed to find my way back to the campsite, chastened and sweating. I was an intruder here, a clumsy amateur, in a world with rules I didn't understand. I couldn't outsmart this environment. I couldn't fight it. If I was going to survive, let alone complete my mission, I had to learn from it. And that meant finding someone who spoke its language. I needed to find the local people, the ones whose ancestors had called this harsh, beautiful, and dangerous land home for 60,000 years. Finding the Aboriginal community took another day of careful driving and following subtle signs in the landscape that I was only just beginning to notice. It wasn't a village in the traditional sense, but a small, quiet settlement of modest houses and open-air shelters, nestled in a grove of eucalyptus trees. My arrival was met with a wall of silence. The children who had been playing stopped and stared. The adults who were sitting in the shade simply watched me, their faces unreadable, their eyes ancient. They had seen men like me before, white men who came with questions, with promises, or with threats. I was just the latest in a long, unbroken line of outsiders. I didn't push, I didn't demand. I simply waited, sitting in the shade by my vehicle, showing that I was willing to operate on their time, not mine. Hours passed. Finally, an old woman approached me. She walked with a slight limp, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles, her white hair a stark contrast to her dark skin. The others called her Auntie May. She was an elder, a keeper of stories. "You're lost," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm looking for something," I replied honestly. "Something in the billabong." "The white fellas who came before you were looking for something too," she said, her voice raspy but strong. "They did not find it. The land. It swallowed them." Over the next few days, through patience and a willingness to listen without judgment, I earned a measure of her trust. I told her about the tracks I'd found, about the creature I was looking for. She didn't look scared. She looked sad. She explained that I wasn't hunting a monster. I was tracking a memory, a spirit of the dream time. The bunyip. In her stories, the bunyip wasn't a bloodthirsty beast. It was a guardian, a spirit of the waterhole itself, ancient and sorrowful. "Its cry is not a roar of anger," she explained, her gaze distant. "It is a cry of grief. It weeps when its home is disturbed, when the balance is broken. The ones who came before, they brought loud noises and iron sticks. They poisoned the water with their presence. The bunyip warned them. They did not listen. Auntie May began to teach me, not how to fight the land, but how to be a part of it. She showed me which leaves could be crushed to keep the flies away, how to find clean water by watching the path of the birds, which berries were poison and which were life. But the most important lesson she taught me was how to listen to the silence, to feel the subtle shifts in the air, to understand the rhythm of the land itself. Finally, on the third day, she stood and pointed towards a distant line of trees. "That way," she said, "there is a quiet place, a place it favors when the sun is high. Go there. Be still. And listen." She looked at me, her old eyes seeming to see straight through me, past the soldier and the agent, to the lost man underneath. "It will only let you see it," she warned, "if it wants to be seen." Following Auntie May's directions was less about navigation and more about a state of mind. I moved slowly, quietly, trying to apply her lessons. I wasn't just looking for the creature's tracks anymore. I was looking for what Auntie May had called the broken balance. Anything that felt wrong, anything that didn't belong. It didn't take long to find it. The first clue was subtle, a thin, orange plastic ribbon tied to a tree branch, almost invisible against the red earth. A surveyor's marker. Then I found another, and another, forming a clear grid pattern leading away from the billabong. This wasn't the work of tourists. This was systematic, professional. Deeper in the bush, I found more definitive evidence. A spent rifle cartridge, its brass casing glinting in the sun, not a hunting rifle caliber, but something smaller, more modern, the kind used in a semi-automatic carbine. A weapon for controlling people, not for hunting kangaroos. The most damning discovery was a set of heavy-duty truck tracks, clumsily concealed under a pile of branches. They led to a cleared area where someone had set up a small, mobile drilling rig. The ground was littered with core samples and empty fuel cans. The pieces clicked into place with a grim, familiar certainty. The missing geological surveyors weren't just tourists with fancy equipment. They were employees of a mining company, operating off the books, prospecting illegally on what was likely sacred land. The bunyip wasn't the aggressor here, it was a native species being pushed out by an invasive one. My search for clues had made me careless. A twig snapped behind me. I spun around, my hand instinctively going for my knife, but I was too late. Two men in dusty tactical gear stood there, rifles held at a low ready. They weren't soldiers, but they weren't amateurs either. Private security. Hired muscle. "You're a long way from anywhere, mate," the bigger one said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Lost?" "Just admiring the scenery," I replied, keeping my hands visible. "This is private property," he said, taking a step forward. "We're going to have to ask you to come with us." I had no intention of doing that. I feigned a stumble, kicking a cloud of red dust into their faces. In the split second of their confusion, I bolted. I didn't run towards my vehicle. I ran towards the one place they might hesitate to follow, the billabong. A shot rang out, a bullet whining past my ear. They weren't trying to detain me. They were trying to silence me. I crashed through the reeds at the water's edge and, without a second thought, plunged into the cool, murky depths of the billabong. As I held my breath and kicked my way into the deeper, darker water, the irony was not lost on me. I had come here to investigate a legendary water creature, and now its home was my only sanctuary. The real threat, the true monster in this ancient land, was, as always, human. The murky water of the billabong enveloped me, a world of muted green and brown. The sounds of my pursuers faded, replaced by the thumping of my own heart in my ears. I swam deeper, my lungs beginning to burn, seeking the cover of a submerged log. I wedged myself into the silt at the bottom, forcing my body to be still, conserving every last molecule of oxygen. It was in that forced silence that I felt it. A pressure change in the water, a subtle displacement. Something large was moving nearby. My first thought was a crocodile, and my hand tightened on my knife. But this felt different. Slower, more deliberate. Then, a shape emerged from the gloom. It was massive, larger than a seal, maybe the size of a small cow. It wasn't the fearsome, tusked monster of the more violent legends. Its body was smooth and powerful, covered in a thick, dark brown fur that rippled in the water. It had a dog-like head with powerful jaws, but its eyes were large, dark, and shockingly gentle. They held a deep, profound sadness. It was an herbivore, I realized instantly, a placid water mammal that belonged to no known scientific classification. A living relic. My eyes were drawn to a deep, ragged gash on its shoulder. The wound was clean-edged, angry, and inflamed. It wasn't from a crocodile's teeth. It looked like it had been caught in a steel trap. The creature paid me no mind. Its attention was focused on a metal object on the billabong floor, a submersible seismic sensor, no doubt left by the mining company. With a slow, determined effort, the bunyip began to push and nudge at the device with its head, trying to dislodge it. It wasn't acting aggressively, it was acting defensively, like an animal trying to remove a thorn from its paw. I must have moved, a slight shift of my foot in the mud, because its head snapped around. Those large, sorrowful eyes met mine. There was a moment of absolute stillness. I saw no malice in its gaze, no predatory instinct. I saw only weariness, pain, and a flicker of intelligent curiosity. It was assessing me, just as I was assessing it. It opened its mouth, but instead of a roar, a low, sonorous sound vibrated through the water, a sound I felt in my bones. It was the call I'd read about, the cry Auntie May had described. It wasn't a threat, it was a lament, a sound of pain, of warning, and of a grief too old to comprehend. Then, with a powerful flick of its webbed hind flippers, it kicked off from the bottom, turned, and vanished back into the dark, silent depths of its home. I surfaced, gasping for air, my mind reeling. The picture was now devastatingly clear. The bunyip wasn't the monster, it was the victim. It wasn't hunting people. It was trying, in its own silent, desperate way, to protect its territory from the invaders. And I had been sent here not to hunt it, but to witness its struggle. I made my way back to the Aboriginal community under the cover of dusk, moving with a new sense of purpose. I wasn't just a visitor anymore, I was a witness. I found Auntie May sitting by a small, crackling fire, as if she had been waiting for me. I sat down across from her and told her everything. I didn't hold back. I described the mining equipment, the armed guards, the pursuit. And then, I told her about the creature. I described its gentle eyes, the deep gash on its shoulder, and its desperate attempt to disable the seismic sensor. As I spoke, the sadness in her eyes deepened, but it was now mixed with a flicker of something else. Resolve. The threat was no longer a vague disturbance. It had a face and a name. "The poison of the modern world has followed you here," she said quietly. "They hurt him. They hurt the land. This cannot stand." In that moment, by the light of a flickering fire in the heart of the Australian Outback, an unlikely alliance was forged. We were two vastly different people from two different worlds, united by a single, common goal. Our roles were clear. Auntie May became my strategist, my intelligence officer. She brought centuries of ancestral knowledge to the table. She drew maps in the dust, showing me secret game trails that would allow me to move through the bush unseen. She pointed out plants that, when crushed, could be used to mask my scent. She even described a type of water lily whose roots, if prepared correctly, could act as a potent analgesic, a poultice that might soothe the bunyip's wound if we could ever get close enough. She taught me to think like the land, not just to move through it. I, in turn, brought the modern world's tactics. I outlined the security team's likely patrol routes, their communication methods, their probable numbers. I explained their objectives and their rules of engagement, or lack thereof. I was the weapon, but she was the one who would aim me. We spent the night planning, our voices low. This was no longer an observation mission. The instruction from a friend, "Do not intervene unless necessary," had reached its threshold. It was necessary. Our objective was simple and audacious. We weren't going to fight the security team head-on. We were going to dismantle their operation piece by piece. We would become ghosts in the landscape, saboteurs, using the environment itself as our primary weapon. Our goal wasn't to hunt the bunyip, it was to protect it. We would drive the mining company out of its home before their greed caused irreparable harm to this ancient, sacred place. The news hit me like a physical blow. One of Auntie May's younger relatives, a boy with eyes as sharp as a hawk's, had returned from a scouting mission near the mining company's main camp. His report was delivered in a hushed, urgent tone, blasting charges. They were tired of the slow, methodical work of core drilling. They were switching to seismic blasting, a brutal method of sending shockwaves deep into the earth to map potential ore deposits. It was fast, efficient, and utterly devastating. The explosions would annihilate the fragile underwater ecosystem of the Billabong. The shockwaves alone would likely kill the wounded bunyip, Antura. We were out of time. The quiet war of attrition was over. This was the endgame. That night, under a sky thick with stars, Auntie May and I had our final war council. She drew in the red dust with a stick, not a map of roads and buildings, but of song lines and waterholes, of snake paths and the sleeping places of spirits. She gave me the ancient playbook. I would write the modern translation. My world was one of ballistics and angles. Hers was one of seasons and spirits. Together we would make them intersect. The plan was not to meet force with force, but to use their own arrogance and ignorance of the land against them. I moved out as the moon climbed high, a ghost clad in dark clothing. My first targets were their lifelines to the outside world. I found their satellite dish, a stark white mushroom in the darkness. A single, clean cut to its thick coaxial cable plunged them into silence. Next, their main transport vehicle, the heavy-duty truck, sat parked and silent. Its tires were thick, built for rough terrain, but not for the razor-sharp edge of my combat knife. I didn't just puncture them, I sliced the sidewalls, rendering them irreparable. They were stranded, isolated. Now the fear could begin. I became the embodiment of the legends they'd probably laughed about. A whisper of movement at the edge of their firelight. A rock thrown to make a sound on the far side of their camp, sending them scrambling into the darkness. I let them see me, a fleeting silhouette, before melting back into the bush. Panic is a contagion, and I was patient zero. As they fanned out in disorganized, angry patrols, I put Auntie May's lessons to work. I led the first group on a chase, keeping just ahead of them, drawing them away from the camp and into a rocky outcrop she had described as snake country. I didn't need to do anything else. A sudden series of panicked yells and the unmistakable hiss of a disturbed king brown snake sent them retreating in terror, their discipline shattered. The second group I led towards the softer ground near the Billabong's edge. Auntie May had called it the thirsty earth. They charged after me, their heavy boots loud in the night, until the ground beneath their leader turned from solid to sludge. His panicked cry as he sank to his waist in thick black mud stopped the pursuit cold. The time they spent frantically pulling their comrade free was more time for me. My final objective was the boat. 2 guards were already on board, loading the last of the charges, preparing to motor out to the center of the Billabong. The chaos I'd created on the shore was the perfect cover. I slipped into the water, the murky coolness a familiar cloak, my knife held between my teeth. I swam with slow, silent strokes, surfacing only for a breath beside the hull. I pulled myself over the side, a silent, dripping shadow. The first guard turned, his mouth opening to shout a warning that never came. A precise strike to the temple sent him slumping to the floor. The second was reaching for his sidearm when I closed the distance, disarming him and using a chokehold to render him unconscious. The boat was mine. I turned my attention to the charges, my fingers, accustomed to both firearms and field medicine, now working to gently disarm the delicate detonators. It was then that the shore erupted in gunfire. The remaining guards, leaderless and terrified, were firing blindly into the darkness, the acrid smell of cordite drifting over the water. The gunshots, the shouting, the scent of fear, it was the final violation, and the heart of the billabong responded. The water beside my small boat began to churn. A massive shape erupted from the depths, rising higher and higher until it towered over me, water cascading from its dark, glistening fur. It was the bunyip. It wasn't the slow, wounded creature I had seen before. This was a primal force, an incarnation of the land's fury. It ignored me completely, its attention fixed on the commotion at the shore. It opened its mouth and let out a single, booming cry. It was not a sound of pain or sorrow this time. It was a roar of absolute authority, a sound that declared, "This is my home, you are not welcome here." That was all it took. The sight of a legend made flesh, a monster from their darkest fears rising from the water, was the final straw. The mercenaries threw down their rifles, their greed instantly extinguished by primal terror. They scrambled into their last working jeep and fled into the night, vanishing from this ancient haunted land for good. The bunyip held its ground, a silent, powerful guardian surveying its now peaceful domain. Its gaze fell on me, a moment of acknowledgement passing between us. Then, with a quiet, powerful splash, it returned to the depths. In the profound silence that followed, I finished my work. I disarmed the last charge, and, before leaving the mercenaries' camp, I walked over to their main laptop. I pulled out their hard drive. I had the proof. The battle for the billabong was over. Dawn broke over the billabong, painting the water's surface in soft pastels. The mining company was gone. Their abandoned camp, a small, ugly scar on the landscape that the land would soon reclaim. The silence had returned, but it was different now. It wasn't the heavy, watchful silence of before. It was a peaceful, breathing quiet. The sound of a world returning to its natural rhythm. I stood on the shore with Auntie May, watching the morning mist rise from the water. We didn't speak for a long time. There was nothing that needed to be said. In the distance, a dark shape moved through the water, gliding with a slow, placid grace. It was the bunyip. It seemed to be moving more freely, the wound on its shoulder already looking less inflamed. We had given it the one thing it needed to heal: peace. I looked at the ancient creature, a living piece of the dreamtime, and realized the profound shift that had occurred within me. I had come here following the familiar patterns of a hunter, expecting to confront a monster. But I hadn't found a monster, I had found a guardian. I hadn't slain a beast, I had protected an endangered species. My entire definition of my work had been turned on its head. "It will remember you," Auntie May said softly, as if reading my thoughts. "The land will remember you." I understood then the true nature of the test a friend had set for me. It wasn't about whether I could survive or win a fight. It was about whether I could see beyond the simplistic labels of monster and human. It was a test of empathy, of judgment, a test to see if the weapon could learn not to fire. Later that day, from a satellite phone in a town hundreds of kilometers away, I anonymously uploaded the hard drive's contents to an investigative journalist and the Australian Environmental Protection Agency. The company and its illegal operation would be exposed. The billabong would be protected, at least for now. My work here was done. As I prepared to leave, to finally follow the original trail to Egypt, my burner phone buzzed one last time. It was a friend. "You have learned to listen. Good. Now come to the place where the whispers began. Egypt is waiting." The message was different this time. The tone wasn't a command or a test. It was an invitation. The trials were over. The real journey, the one that held the answers to who I was and why I was here, was about to begin.